Hi, and thank you for joining us at our virtual Richmond CIO Forum. I'm excited to introduce this session's speaker, Dan Russell from Datavale. Dan is an SVP of Strategic Alliances at Datavale, responsible for establishing partnerships with the leading technology providers for business applications, analytics, and cloud services. His organizational acumen drives collaboration between the strategic partners and Datavale to bring additional services to Datavale's customers. Before I pass it over to Dan to get started, please make sure to have your cameras on for a more engaging experience. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat section for me to read out, or you can unmute yourself to ask. We encourage participation. At the end of the session, we'll have a QR code and link available for you so you can give your feedback on today's session. And now I will pass it over to Dan to get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope that you find this session to be beneficial for you. As she mentioned, I have a long history in the IT industry. I've done a lot of consulting and working with many different companies across different industry verticals and sizes. And then today I work for Datavale, and we have been in business for 15 years. We have a lot of our clients through those years, we've helped them migrate to the cloud, and some of them still remain on-prem, and some a combination of both. So my goal today is to share information that will be helpful for you wherever you are in your cloud journey. The material's set up a couple ways. I've got some upfront kind of overall history of the cloud. We did a survey of over 200 companies. I have the results of that survey that I'm going to share with you, so you could kind of each benchmark where you are in your cloud journey compared to some of your peers. And then I've also called out best practices to help you in your cloud journeys. And then at the back end, I've got some case studies where we can talk through different scenarios that clients have had and how they handled it, and comment, which cloud they went to, what platforms they chose, what kind of workloads they moved, that kind of stuff. Very open to questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat window, and Richmond Events will watch that for me and key me if there's something to be answered on the spot. Otherwise, we'll have a little bit of time at the back end. But with that said, let's jump right in. So let's talk a little bit about the cloud as a whole. Today, approximately 30% of the workloads are being run in the cloud. So as much as we hear about cloud, and I'm sure you guys hear as much or more than I do, not everything's in the cloud today. So about 30% of the workloads, and this is pretty consistent. This particular quote came from Tech Analysis Research, but you get the same quotes from Amazon, from Azure, from Gartner. And Gartner estimates that by 2022, 75% of all databases will be in the cloud. So it just shows you how fast things are moving to the cloud. So that's in 24 months, 75% of the data workloads will be there. A little bit on the history of the cloud. If you think back in the evolution, centralized computing has been around for a while. Cloud's just the modern evolution of that. And early on, everybody was trying to figure out how to use the cloud. What are you going to use it for? What are the right workloads? And then Salesforce launched themselves in the late 90s. And to me, that's really when cloud started becoming relevant. And then quickly, the software vendors realized that this subscription-based, cloud-based model was a viable business model for them. So a lot of the other software vendors started to follow suit, with Workday coming out as an HR application, Oracle starting to work on their Fusion applications, Microsoft moving their applications, SAP moving theirs to cloud-based. So now pretty much all the software vendors are starting with cloud first, as you know. In 2006 is really when compute started to take off, and that's when Amazon announced AWS. And 3 years later, in 2009, Microsoft announced Azure, and now you've got Google and Oracle Cloud and others that have popped up. In 2018 is where in 2016, we used to see a lot of lift and shifting of workloads, where people looking at moving out of a data center and moving all the workloads that were in that data center. So it's kind of more compute based. In 2018, people starting to focus more on the data platforms. They realize that the data platforms is a complex move. It can take more sophistication. You got to be more planful about it. And the specific data platform itself can make a difference, whether it's SQL or Oracle or MySQL or Postgres or whatever. And that trend really started to pick up momentum in 2018. So just about 3 years ago. And then 2 years ago, we started seeing clients get serious about leveraging the cloud modern data platforms provided by the cloud providers, AWS, Azure being the two largest. Mongo is gaining a lot of traction with their Atlas platform, and Oracle's announced their MySQL managed platform. And then more recently, we're seeing a lot of interest in analytics, using the cloud for analytics, whether it's leveraging cloud-based software like Redshift or Snowflake, or Oracle's Autonomous Cloud, leveraging Azure's data lake tools to get your environments into the cloud. But there's been a lot of advancements in those areas, and the trend is picking up, and also app modernization. So we'll talk through each of these throughout the presentation today.
Hey Dan, sorry to interrupt. We just seem to have control of the screen. So if you want to take back control of that slide deck, we've just been following along with you. So I'd rather you be control of it than us.
So what do I need to do to take control? Because I'm clicking.
Yep, just go to the screen share, the share screen, and take over. This is just a shadow that we've been following along with you. There you go. Much better than us doing it. Trust me, I appreciate it.
Okay. So one thing I did want to note is, there's still 70% of the workloads not on-prem or not in the cloud. What are those workloads? And a little bit about why. The number one workload we see that's slow to move to the cloud is mainframe-based applications. You think in some of the industries, especially financial services and insurance, there's huge transactional systems that have been highly customized over years that still run on mainframes. And those applications are pretty much staying on-prem. Some people are looking to lift and shift those into the cloud, into an IaaS environment. We're seeing that trend pick up a little bit. And then some people are looking to modernize portions of those. Another applications that aren't moving is highly sensitive data security. There's still some concerns about cloud data security, although I can tell you the cloud vendors have worked hard to close the gap and have extremely high security today. Client server applications where there's a thick client on site, we see that, and then manufacturing shop floor where they're trying to do real-time control of shop floor equipment. Most of those applications, due to the potential latency, have stayed on-prem. Okay, there we go. So now let's talk about the two trends. So in my eyes, Cloud 1.0, started back in the 90s, early 2000s, really was platform-based, very infrastructure-based, picking a cloud platform of choice, whether that's AWS, Azure, et cetera, and building out the platform and then migrating your workloads, many times in a lift and shift fashion. And then more recently, where they're getting more planful about the platforms. What I'm seeing in the Cloud 2.0 trend is really look at the workloads first. So instead of being infrastructure-based decisions, people are looking at the workloads themselves, the business apps, the analytics, the databases, and then trying to design the cloud infrastructure and select which cloud they move to based upon the different workloads that they have. And that's really what I see is more modern day cloud today. A little bit about market share. So we hear a lot about AWS and Azure. AWS has the largest market share and Azure is gaining ground. They're both growing at about the same rate per year. If you look at the annual revenue that's coming in, some of the Azure spend does include Microsoft Office 365 and some of their SaaS, where AWS doesn't have it. Most of theirs is compute. Google, we're seeing Google gain some market share. Most of that is in the analytics space. I don't know if you've talked to Google or not, but they will try to leverage Google Analytics as a differentiator on bringing your analytic workloads to Google. And then Oracle and IBM have worked hard to gain some position in the cloud. Most of Oracle's foothold has been in their SaaS applications, which is gaining a lot of traction. But on the compute side, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure and IBM's newer cloud, there's not a lot of market adoption of those yet. You tend to see those platforms in clients that are very loyal to either Oracle or IBM. Now let's look at the survey. I mentioned the survey so you can kind of benchmark yourself. The survey had over 200 responses, and it was a very good mix of companies from large enterprises to medium to small. And we also had some government and public sector. So I think it was a very good sample size of the industry as a whole. What we found was only 10% of those clients surveyed were 100% in the cloud. 60% were hybrid, meaning they have some workloads in the cloud, some on-prem. And 20% had not started moving workloads yet, but they're actively evaluating and planning their migrations. And 10% hadn't even started considering the cloud yet. Most of you are probably going to fall in that 60% range. And when you look at where are they moving their workloads to, multi-cloud is becoming more common. Clients are choosing either AWS, Azure, or Google, IBM, Oracle for different workload reasons, especially in the larger enterprises. What we're finding is many of the larger enterprises don't want to be tied to any one cloud vendor. They want to have kind of diversify their risk, but also diversify their spend. So they kind of purposeful move to multi-cloud. In the mid-market, it tends to be more workload based, to where a certain workload will take them to a cloud that gives them a second cloud. Most of the mid-market and SMB would prefer to be on a single cloud if they can. And then the private clouds had some market share for a while, but we're seeing that market share continue to go down. Many times that was a local hoster that's moved into kind of a private cloud type environment, but it doesn't have the scale, doesn't have the PaaS offerings that the public clouds have. So the gap between the private cloud experience and the public cloud experience is widening quickly. And so most clients are choosing not to land in a private cloud unless they've got some unique reason to be in a private cloud. Some of the best practices to think about when you're choosing which cloud and should you be multi-cloud or single cloud is, we'll talk more about this, but let the workloads drive that decision versus the platform. If you are using the public cloud, you are going to get advantage of the rapid advancements, especially from AWS and Microsoft on their PaaS offerings, which are optimizing the performance of all the different workloads. And then but the single cloud, if you could stay there, it will improve your efficiency and optimize your internal staffing and support costs. So that's something else to keep in mind. So try to make sure that there's a reason why you go multi-cloud would be my recommendation. And then multi-cloud gives you less dependence on any one cloud. So cost for cloud, everybody wants to know, is cloud cheaper? Is it not cheaper? There are a lot of, all the cloud providers have tools that you can use to forecast and estimate your consumption. And we have tools that we can run in your environment that will then allow us to estimate your sizing for any of the clouds that I've mentioned today. And then that allows us to help you price those clouds, and you can determine what the price is for which cloud that you land on. So those tools are out there and available for you to use too. What we found is almost 50% of the customers in the survey said that the cloud costs were about what they expected. 27% said they were more than they expected, 9% less, and 15% hadn't benchmarked their costs. So when managing costs of the cloud, what are some of your best practices? One is obvious, your spend's going to shift from more CapEx to OpEx. So each of you are probably going through that transition today as you shift not only your hardware infrastructure, but also your software to the SaaS-based model. The most important thing you can do to manage your costs is to monitor your consumption. The cloud vendors, the way their billing works, it can be very complex, and you can get a large single bill, and it's hard to identify which workloads are driving your consumption. And so we highly recommend using tools to monitor your consumption and what's driving your consumption, and then use that to optimize. We see a lot of clients spinning environments up, scaling those environments, but they're not as good at scaling them back down when the business needs have backed off. So that would be your third recommendation. Already talked about leveraging tools. And then the final thing is all the cloud vendors are more than willing to sell you reserved instances where you buy in advance multi-year contracts for consumption. And I would recommend you look at your stable workloads. And as soon as you can identify the consumption levels that you're at, start looking at converting to preferred reserved instances. The discounts are substantial, and that will save you quite a bit of money. Your variable loads like your analytics are not good workloads for your reserved instances, but some of your transactional systems, financials, things like that, HR, more applications that are more stable in their consumption would be good candidates for reserved instances. So what kind of workloads are clients moving? This is once again from the survey. The top three are databases, analytics, and web content hosting. Almost 70% of the respondents were moving those three workloads. And then it starts to spread out around the different kinds of application needs, whether they're mobile or app dev and DevOps, app modernization, machine learning and AI. So the question would be, why are databases, analytics, and web content moving faster to the cloud than other workloads? I think the main reason is the whole compute power that you have in the cloud. And these environments do scale up and scale down. And the cloud gives you that ability to where you don't have to over provision in your own data center, large environments for your analytics. You can scale your cloud environments up and down, and same with your databases to support your business needs. Usually what happens though is when you move the database environment, you don't see people separating the database from their app servers. They move together. So the database might be the reason they move, but then the application sitting on top of that data platform move to the cloud. When you look at the applications, and this is something we're a big proponent of, is taking a look at your full portfolio of applications and rationalizing that portfolio. You're going to have some applications up at the top that are going to be sunsetted in the near term. Why go through the cost and the pain to move those to the cloud? Leave them in their existing environments until you sunset those applications. You're going to have some that you want to retain, but you want to keep on-prem. Those could be your highly secured environments, or you could have some of these large mainframe environments that I mentioned before, but there might be other business apps, manufacturing shop floor, things like that you're going to keep on-prem or in a hosted environment. The next is rehosting to the cloud, and there's two ways to get there. You can either go there through a manual process where you set up the cloud environments and then you do a manual migration, or you can use migration tools and automate that, and that would be rehosting. A lot of clients use this as their first step to the cloud, but quite often now we're seeing clients skip the lift and shift phase and start to move workloads into more of a PaaS environment right from the get-go. And that would be, looking at the PaaS alternatives from the different vendors, picking the right one for your workload, determining the platform and architecting, building the environment, and then doing the migration. And many times you can use migration tools to help accelerate those migrations. The next would be repurchase. You're going to replace a legacy app with SaaS. That's kind of a straight buy automatically in the cloud. And then the final one is refactoring or building cloud native applications. That's where all the app modernization takes place. And we're going to talk about a couple case studies and that in a little bit later. When we look at the application trends, what are the trends today? You're probably seeing these in your business today. Everybody's moving towards, where possible, more of an agile development methodology, leveraging, continuous integration, continuous development, so that they could not only build the apps in an agile fashion, they could rapidly deploy them. And then using DevOps to tie closely to your application cycles. So some of the trends we're seeing is most of the package vendors are moving to a SaaS-based model. So if your vendors have not moved there, they probably will, or you'll end up replacing some of your legacy package apps with SaaS apps. And then we're seeing a lot of cloud native application development to replace some of the legacy apps. These will tend to be some of your smaller front end applications, whether it's e-commerce or whether it's some of your customer support, things like that are moving quickly to kind of a cloud native application. We actually have a case study on that today that we'll share with you. Containerization. If your organization is not using containers today, I would say the odds are extremely high you will be in the next 12 to 24 months. And those containers can help you to move applications from on-prem into the cloud. And then once you're there, then you can start to modernize those using microservices and DevOps to try to speed the time to market for your replacement applications, and all those trends we're seeing today. Let's talk a little bit about analytics. In the survey, we asked clients, what role will cloud analytics play in your upcoming initiatives? 30% said very important, and 35% said somewhat important. So you can see that 65% of the respondents feel like cloud is going to play a role in their analytics space. 17 hadn't thought about it, 7% don't plan on leveraging the cloud, and 11 are still in that evaluation phase. So you can see this is one of the workloads that's moving faster to the cloud. So let's talk a little bit about why. First reason is when you look to buy your tools, whether it's your back-end repositories or whether it's your data integration tools or whether it's your front-end analytic tools, all the vendors are putting most of their R&D efforts into their cloud-based offerings first. So you're going to see new innovations come in through the cloud. If you're on-prem, you'll be a little bit behind where the vendors are with their product development and releases. The second is, as I mentioned before, the workloads tend to be very dynamic. So they scale up and scale down quickly based upon specific business needs. And because of that, the cloud is a good place for those analytic backends. And then, the other thing is what best practice, the analytic environments can be very complex. We've worked on some that are extremely complex and some that are very simple. But in most cases, I would recommend doing a POC on your analytics. So you could architect, design it, pick your cloud platform of choice, pick the tools that you're going to use, and then stand up a POC. In Amazon's case, they actually have a data lab that you can use depending upon the partner that you choose. If you choose a partner that's one of their data specialists, then you could get access to their data lab. With Microsoft, you could do POCs on in your own provisioned environments, either yourself or leveraging a partner. So now let's look about database modernization. What is happening? You hear a lot in the market about database modernization. You think about the industry, IBM had DB2, then Oracle came out and gained a lot of space. We had Sybase that converted, and then SQL Server took off. So we have a lot of these legacy relational data platforms that are underneath the majority of our business apps today. But now clients are looking at moving those data platforms to the cloud. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to look at, do you modernize or do you not modernize those data platforms? So in the cloud survey that we had, 15% are already migrating to more of a cloud modernized platform, 20% are evaluating, and 22% are considering it in the future. And then you've got 10% who said anything new is going to be built on a cloud native platform to start with. And then almost a third said they're going to keep it on their legacy platforms. So it's not quite as rapid adoption of the cloud modernized databases as analytics is moving. But Dataville specializes in databases and analytics, and we have over 500 clients, and we're seeing a very high interest in modernization. And our customers are looking at the options, and then they're deciding, do they modernize now, or do they migrate and look to modernize in the future? We already hit on most of these. Should be workload based when you make those decisions on whether you're going to modernize or not. And then there's a big uptick now. It's kind of a newer wave on purpose-built data platforms. I'll talk more about those in a second, but these would be databases. They're designed around a particular use case, like Snowflake and Redshift for analytics, or there's graph databases, or MongoDB, which is a document database that handles some types of workloads like e-commerce better than a relational would. So these purpose-built databases, you're starting to see increase the client's interest. They still have smaller market shares, but they are growing faster. So in the survey, we asked clients what were their data platforms that they're currently using. SQL Server is by far, almost 70% of the respondents are using SQL Server, 40% are using Oracle. And then you see it scale down from there. But what we are seeing is that some of the high growth engines where clients are getting serious about moving to is MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, and some of the cloud platforms like AWS's RDS and Aurora, and Azure's SQL environment as their managed platform, and then some of those purpose-built databases I mentioned before. So the question you might be asking is, why would you look to move to one of these more newer open source type platforms? The number one driver is cost. I think clients are getting a little frustrated with some of the database vendors and how they have priced their databases over time. And that's driving people to consider alternatives. And then the other is, quite honestly, some of your workloads will run better in some of these modern platforms that have been built more recently. Probably the two most common conversions that we're seeing today is the number one conversion we're seeing is Oracle to Postgres. And it's not too complex to move from Oracle to Postgres. There's some similarities behind how Postgres is designed and architected that makes it easier to do the schema conversions and to convert some of the code that's embedded in the databases. And then on the SQL Server side, the most common platform we see people moving to is MySQL. And then MongoDB, we don't see a lot of people converting a legacy database application from SQL and Oracle and DB2 onto Mongo, but we're seeing Mongo take off in new application development. for particular use cases where the document database architecture will perform better than a relational architecture. So what are some of those, why are people moving to cloud managed? And these would be the data platforms that are provided by the cloud providers, with AWS and Microsoft being the leader, but not the only ones in this space. One is to take advantage of some of these purpose-built platforms. Performance is probably the largest reason why people are moving to cloud managed platforms. Gives them that scalability and high availability. And as I mentioned, licensing costs, it's a way for you to start to lessen you can bring your own license on some of the platforms, and other ones, like if you move to Amazon Aurora Postgres or Aurora MySQL, then you no longer license the software. It comes from Amazon instead, and it's at a lower cost. Another goal is to reduce some of the administration. A lot of people think these cloud managed platforms are going to eliminate the need for a DBA. They do not. They do lessen what the DBA does. They offload some of the lower level tasks, like patching from the DBA, but you still need to have a DBA monitoring your environments. There's a fair amount of sophistication that comes with these cloud platforms, and you're going to need higher level DBA skills to take advantage of the cloud and to ensure that they're performing well and that your availability is what you want it to be. And then serverless is another reason, as people move more and more towards serverless-based applications for some of their newer applications. So what are the cloud managed options? AWS, the two largest AWS has is RDS and Aurora. Aurora is only for MySQL and Postgres. RDS, you can pretty much move any data platform to RDS. I've got those bolded because we're seeing a lot of adoption of those. And then AWS is gaining some traction with Redshift in the analytics space. And then they have other data cloud managed options available to you, but they're not as commonly adopted today. In the Azure space, Azure SQL is pretty commonly adopted to move to a managed environment instead of to their Azure IaaS environment. We're seeing some uptick in Cosmos DB, which would be their version of a document DB to compete with Mongo. And then their Azure's announced their capabilities for MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, and Redis, but they're not as commonly adopted today. AWS is much more mature in running these workloads than Azure is. And so most of those workloads we see landing on the AWS platform. MongoDB is moving as many of their clients as possible onto their Atlas managed environment. They offer additional functionality and performance advantages and security in their Atlas environment. So that's why clients, and then if you use Mongo, you can choose the cloud that you run it in, whether it's AWS, Azure, or GCI. And then Oracle's trying to keep up with the MySQL space. They recently announced MySQL on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. It's not available on other clouds, but it is available on the Oracle Cloud. So now let's talk for a few minutes about case studies. Let me just take a quick look. Yep, we're spot on time. So I'm going to walk you through some case studies just so you can kind of glean what other companies did and why. The first one is a database migration and modernization. The business is a $5 billion company that outsources customer service. So, they're call centers. They have call centers. They handle the inbound requests, and they can also manage accounts receivable and do third-party collections. So it's kind of a business process outsourcing type company. They're heavy in the electronics industry, but they also support other industries. And the challenge they had is some of their compute environments were getting old, and they were going to have to go through significant refreshes in their data centers. So they did an evaluation and decided to move to the cloud versus refreshing their on-prem environments. They were going to move all their business applications and their data warehouses. They went through an evaluation, chose AWS as their platform of choice. And their goal was to improve performance, especially for global customers, because they had broadened their footprint from North America into Europe. And they had a large scale Europeans that were companies that didn't have the same performance against their customer service applications. So they wanted to get to the cloud where they could leverage regions around the globe to improve performance. And one of their critical success factors that they looked at this was how to make sure that they could outperform their existing on-prem Oracle RAC and Exadata environments. And any of you that have that know that it's high performance for your Oracle workloads. and they didn't want to lose the benefits of that as they moved to the cloud. We already talked about the latency concern for their European customers, and then reducing their costs. So what did they move, and how did they do it? They basically had a pretty broad portfolio underneath their applications of SQL Server. They also had Oracle E-Business Suite as their ERP. They're running some of their Oracle database applications and E-Business Suite on top of Exadata. And then they decided to move the workloads. Some of those workloads have moved to EC2, which is the IaaS offering from AWS. And some of them have chosen to modernize a subset of their portfolio onto Aurora Postgres. So they are converting, they did convert some of their databases from Oracle's database to Postgres. What were the approach that they used? Went through a cloud architecture process. They did a POC because they were concerned about that performance. And then they went through the migration. And once they migrated, then they did the modernization, moving into some of the workloads from Oracle into Postgres. Overall, it went very smooth. It improved performance, and it's greatly reduced their costs. And since then, they spun off a piece of their business, and it made it very easy for them to carve that unit out from their workloads and move that out of their environments as part of the sell-off. So it shortened their time to divest of a piece of their business. The next one is another database modernization and migration. The company is based out of the New York, and they're a $50 million company. They're a software company, but they're growing very fast. They have an intelligent platform for investors. So the private equity and the capital investment groups use their tool to manage their portfolio of companies that they've invested in. So it's very technology heavy. The workloads are quite large. Managing many terabytes of data from many different data sources, and they pull those in today. In the prior to the migration, they pulled them into a very large monolithic SQL Server environment, and they wanted to try to improve their performance and lower their cost of operation. So one of the keys, critical success factors, was try to segregate some of their functionality to reduce their dependency on the legacy monolithic environment that they had. They wanted to lower the costs. So they've done a very heavy modernization from SQL Server onto MySQL, and they wanted to improve the performance and increase availability. They also chose Amazon as their platform of choice. They moved the SQL Server first into EC2, and then they did the modernizations in phases, moving on to MySQL and using Amazon's RDS environment and then Aurora. They started with an assessment to kind of architect and plan everything. Then they decided on the phased approach. And then they have moved a combination of their databases and their applications in phases. It went very smooth. And it's greatly improved their application availability. We have a white paper on this one that's out there that if you're interested, I can get you some follow-up, which has some further information on their particular use case. Okay, there we go. The next case study is an analytic migration. So there's a very large tobacco company that you guys would all know, global in footprint, that has a very large division based out of Canada that manufactures and distributes tobacco. So if you don't know the tobacco industry, they make the tobacco itself in large plants, and then they ship it out, and it gets put into the packaging, whether it's cigarettes, cigars, or whatever, in packaging, and it gets packaged and sent out to the distributors. So they do that final manufacture and distribution through retail chains in Canada. Now they're about a $200 million company. So this would be what I'd call a mid-sized company, but they're part of a global enterprise, but they have separate systems to support their business. The business case was they needed to improve their reporting and analytics. They had an older environment, and also their business model, as you can think about tobacco, everything used to be sold through retail, and now some of it's going straight to consumers, especially in the smokeless world. Their legacy data warehouse was outsourced to a company, and it was more of a black box. So it was big and monolithic, and they didn't have any control over it and how to optimize it. They had the front end analytics to it, but they didn't have any control over the back end and the data integrations. So that's some of what they wanted to do, as they wanted to leverage unstructured data. They wanted the ability to scale up and scale it down and reduce some of the complexity and make it easier to do self-service down at the business user level. They were SQL Server backend with business objects front end. They moved initially the SQL Server onto Amazon EC2, and now they are converting their front end from business objects to Microsoft's Power BI. They were one of the companies that leveraged Amazon's Data Lab to do the POC and test out some of the different tool sets to see how it would compare and how it would perform. And the result is they have a very scalable environment. It's greatly enhanced the business users' ease of use and self-service, and they have incorporated unstructured data now. So they've accomplished their key objectives for the project. Now we're going to walk through an app modernization example. This is a $1 billion public university company with over 1,000 students. So that's a pretty large university. If you think about some of the larger ones in North America, this would be one of those. But they have a very large international population. It's a key piece of their undergraduate and their graduate programs. So they want to continue to attract those students into the both North America campuses, but also international campuses where they have partnerships. So the application they had for international students to apply was very old. It needed to be refreshed. It wasn't a very efficient portal. Students would get frustrated with it. The process wasn't smooth. So as opposed to moving that to the cloud, they looked at, okay, how do we modernize this application? And how do we streamline the whole student application process, the review process, the acceptance process? And if you could speed that up, you're more likely as a university, the faster you can get to a decision, the more likely you are to get that student to come to your campus. If your process is too slow, they might choose another university that accepts them sooner. And they had, like a lot of universities, they use a Oracle PeopleSoft backend, and they need to keep that backend in place, but they need a front end that could integrate to it easily. So in this case, they chose Azure as their platform. So they took their PeopleSoft environment, they migrated some of that into the cloud, and then they built their new, they left actually, a lot of the ERP they left on-prem. So the Oracle PeopleSoft stayed on-prem, but they built a new modernized front end in the cloud, Azure native, on SQL Server using Azure DevOps, Node.js, and Angular. So the approach that they use, they decided to use a microservices-based architecture. So many of you may be familiar with that, but those of you that are not, where you kind of break your application up into smaller sub-elements, build those and then integrate them together. It's a faster way to, as you modernize applications, if you're going to keep some of your legacy backend, and it makes it easier to deploy. They did move to an agile development methodology and leveraging DevOps through that. And they chose to do quarter releases. So they use agile and build throughout the quarter. But as a university, they have kind of a controlled release process. So they do that on a quarterly basis. In each quarter, they prioritize the backlog that feeds their next wave of sprints for the next quarter. So they have ended up with a greatly modernized feature-rich application. The feedback they've been getting from students has been exceptional, and they have greatly reduced time in their application review and acceptance process, and they're getting faster offer letters out and getting a faster acceptance rate or higher acceptance rate of their students. We got one more. The final one is application modernization. It's a $5 billion utility company based in North America. Their business case is, as everything in the utility industry has gone from legacy paper and invoicing to online and monitoring your energy consumption, your bill, outages, things like that. Everybody wants an online experience. And so they wanted to move from that kind of old clunky environment to modern. They also had uniquely, they used to bill every other month, and they were moving to a monthly billing cycle, and it was going to double their cost to do the old process and manual billing. So they wanted to automate before that all happened. So they went through a process to build a complete new customer portal. And they had to have a lot of regulatory compliance, as you can expect in utility industry. And they wanted to make it accessible for individuals with disabilities to easily utilize it too. So they also chose Azure as their backend for the cloud platform. They were SQL Server on-prem, and they built their new application around .NET, utilized SharePoint, Angular, and Azure DevOps. And some of the results, it's been an exponential improvement for them. JD Powers, as you know, does a lot of customer sat surveys, and they now are one of the top utilities for their user experience, and they used to be one of the worst. And it's because of this portal that they now provide to their clients to monitor everything about their utility consumption. You as a consumer can monitor everything that you want and manage your whole business with them through their cloud portal. They also moved to more of a DevOps environment. As they made this move, went from kind of a legacy waterfall into agile DevOps capabilities. And just in the billing alone, they saved $10 million. They've greatly reduced the call volume on their customer support center, which also has driven their costs down. And they're giving much better customer service now during any outages and storms that occur. So let me pause here and see what kind of questions you all might have, and I'll hit you with some summaries.
Hey Dan, it's David here from Maestro Gaines. I got a couple questions for you. One with regards to data egress costs from one cloud provider to another. Are you seeing a trend that those costs are increasing? And I'm curious if that is an attempt by these organizations to lock you into a single platform. Then I'll have a question about Databricks and Azure, but I'll let you answer the first one first.
Yeah, so yes, they want you to get to their cloud platform, and they're trying to drive up your consumption, and they're trying to make it sticky so you're less likely to move. We're not seeing the cost to move that data is not your big cost. It's more your ongoing consumption. So you might incur the cost to move your data from one platform to the next. But I think in the end, you're going to, if there's a business reason to move, I don't think that cost is getting to where it would prevent you from making those moves. I think
I'll give you a clarification on that. So the environment is really, we're collecting data out of Internet of Things devices and then compiling it together with other IoT information and then pulling it into Azure. So this is an ongoing basis. So we're taking from AWS and pushing it into Azure. And I'm just starting to notice that on that one specific area for egress from AWS to Azure, the costs are going up. And I'm just sort of curious if that's a trend.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that trend, David. So your use case is something that I usually don't get involved in the billing side that much. I get feedback from clients on that. So you might be closer to that particular situation than me. In working with the cloud providers, and we work with all of them, I haven't heard them talk about that as a goal to drive up additional revenues. So there might be some other reason why you're seeing that climb, but IoT is obviously one of the high transactional environments. You're going to have a lot of data movement. So I could see how that's starting to impact your business.
Yes. The second question I had is with regards to Databricks and Azure now offering the ability to manage unstructured, semi-structured, and structured data in a single platform. I think you probably, hopefully I got the name right, I think there's akin to Lakehouse. So I'm curious if you see those sort of products becoming a trend down the road for providers like Google.
Definitely see that as a trend. As everybody's trying to leverage more and more unstructured data in their analytic environments, and much of that unstructured data comes from outside your enterprise. I'm seeing all the vendors work hard to accelerate their capabilities in managing the different data types that you mentioned, and making it easier to get those into the analytic environment so you can take advantage of them. So that's definitely an uptrend, not only in the providers, but also in the customers looking to leverage those different data types.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Yep. Other questions?
This is Jason. I'm with a company called Moffett Nickel. We are a government contractor. And one of the reasons that we struggled with heavy cloud adoption is the security aspects are not awesome. And most of the cloud providers have addressed that by coming up with a separate cloud that is substantially more expensive and sort of negates all of the financial benefits of moving to the cloud. So we've left a lot of our on-prem in place because of that. Do you see any industry changes? It seems like right now they are not addressing this. It's sort of just sitting in the wings of, well, nobody really cares, so we're going to keep doing what we do.
Well, Jason, it's a good point. And we do have some public sector clients of ours, and the GovCloud offering, as they call it, both by AWS and Azure, is designed to address that. But really what they've done is they've almost moved it into more of it's almost more similar to a hosted environment where you're getting some more dedicated environments for you, which is why the costs are higher. It is addressing the security needs, but it's definitely at a higher price point than the traditional public cloud. We are seeing a big uptick in government agencies. We're moving one of the large US agencies right now into one of the cloud providers. Can't tell you who, but it's one of the big agencies that you'd be very familiar with that gets involved with emergency responses around the country. And I think you're starting to see more and more governments consider the cloud. It does take some more thoughtfulness around which workloads. And if in our survey, the government is probably the slowest mover to the cloud, but we are seeing an uptick. The other thing we're seeing is looking at lifting and shifting some of the environments that are package-based, like maybe an Oracle ERP, like EBS or PeopleSoft, into the cloud, into an IaaS environment. So I think you're starting to see them address that. Jason, I think they get more and more people to move to the Gov Cloud, then they can offer a better price point. But I think the sheer lower levels of users makes it a higher cost environment for them. So over time, I think you're going to see that cost come down, but I don't think it's ever going to close the gap with the public cloud.
Okay, thanks for the
Yep.
comment.
Other questions? All right, well, let me hit you with some summary. And then you'll get at the back of this is my contact information. You're more than welcome to reach out to me if you have follow-up questions in later. So kind of summarizing some of the best practice, is really important to do a cloud strategy and roadmap. I think most companies do. Early on, companies just quickly jumped in and did some lifting and shifting, and it didn't always go so well. So hopefully you've got a cloud strategy and roadmap in place. If not, I would recommend that you leverage us or another partner to help you through that process. I mentioned looking at the 6 R's for looking at your application portfolio. Think about the cloud 2.0 as more workload based. So your apps is a big piece of that portfolio that you got to look at. On database migrations, consider modernizations. It's not going to be right for every workload, but I do think there's some benefits you can get out of modernizing a subset of your data platforms. Analytics, clearly a roadmap is very important. It's one of the more complex things to move because all the different parts, and you're usually multi-vendor in your analytic environments between the back end, the data integration, the front end tools. So it's not all coming from one provider. Infrastructure architect. So a lot of people lifted and shifted, and it's even if you've moved things to the cloud, it's good to do an architectural review of your existing cloud environments to see if there's a way that you could improve the performance, availability, et cetera, of your cloud environments. And then tools. A lot of automation is happening to eliminate labor and reduce your labor. If you're going to do databases, there's schema conversion tools. AWS has their own. There's third-party ones. They're very good. We work with a lot of them. They're getting better and better, and it can help optimize, the level of effort to move your data platforms. And then security and compliance. There's a set of security that the cloud providers take on, and there's a portion of it that's your responsibility. And you just need to integrate those into your overall security plan, especially today with some of the concerns that people have in security. So just make sure you have a solid security plan. Hopefully you got a good CISO that works with you that can help you through that process. If not, there's firms out there that specialize in that space. Highly recommend doing a cost analysis and running an ROI, leveraging POCs. Already talked about the benefits of leveraging reserved instances. Each of the cloud providers have vendor funding programs. Most of those require you to work with one of their partners. So if you get to one of their higher tier partners, then you have access to their funding programs to help you reduce your cost to move and the cost to operate for the first year. Leverage the partners. So figure out what you're good at, figure out where you've got those gaps. The partners are pretty efficient at coming in and helping you. So I would recommend that you pick partners to help you move faster and smoother to the cloud. And then the partners, the good ones, will help you also train up your staff if you want to maintain support, or they'll offload that for you and give you that as an option. So any other, that's kind of it. If you have any questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, email me, dan.russell@datavel.com. Hopefully this session was beneficial for you today. I know you've got a few other sessions today, but thanks for your time, and good luck with wherever you are in your cloud journeys.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you to all of the attendees that joined on. As a reminder, we do have the survey in the chat section. So let us know what you thought of this session. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. And again, if you do have any questions for Dan, his contact information was there, or reach out to anyone in Richmond events, and we will definitely get you in contact with him. Thank you.